Well, hello and welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we journey chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is chapter 10 of The Horse and His Boy in the House of Tom Bombadil.
You are so relaxed right now that you got the title wrong.
Whenever I love being at your house, Phil, but your couches are too comfy for podcasting.
These are not work couches.
They are not work couches, so I am fully reclined. I don't think I'll do this all the whole episode because that will
because you'll fall asleep.
I'll sit up over here. But what an interesting episode. I don't want to be asleep for this or don't want to be too comfy for this because it feels like there's so much to discuss.
There's a lot here. I know that because when I tried to write the summary, I went maybe 60, 70 words over my limit and then spent about the same amount of time trimming it down to get it under the 150s. Yeah,
there's a lot that happens here. I thought last episode, I said I thought this might be a Marshwiggle, so that was wrong.
I remembered that when I read the word march. I thought, oh, that's what he was saying.
Well, and I said, I know it doesn't say marsh, but I was like, I was like, and the words are just similar. They have nothing to do with one another, and we're not even in the right place. But I was like, I wonder if we'll get some, like, we know that, Puddleglum, for instance, was kind of a little bit of a loner, and so were we going to see that from another Marshwiggle? I don't know. I just was kind of hoping there'd be some other connection going out on a limb there, but nope, not at all. A completely new character shows up here. Another unnamed character shows up here, and then seemingly his time is coming to an end by the end of this chapter.
It seems like it, yeah. Another tall guy with a beard.
Yeah, another tall guy with beard who speaks kind of in code. Doesn't tell us a lot. And again, another thing that happens here is our core four split up once more.
Yeah.
They were together for not even a whole chapter.
Right.
They got together in the middle of chapter 9. By the middle of chapter 10, Shasta's already off by himself.
Just means more adventure to be had.
Well, which character, before we get into our summary and do some other stuff, but which character comes off as the worst here? There's a lot of interesting character things that happen.
Yeah, I think Bree.
You think Bree?
Yeah.
I think so too. And we're going to talk. There's a really great lesson that happens here at the end. Just some all-time C.S. Lewis great lessons in kind of Bree's failure. But man, I was so mad at Bree in the middle of this chapter. I was like, oh, look at this little cowardly horse, know? And I think I love what Lewis is actually doing with that, but man, did I go from being like, oh, Bree's one of the best characters in the book to being like, Bree is not a fun character. I don't like him. Whin all day long. Forget about Bree.
Well, and that's part of it because of the role that Bree's been playing and the things that Bree has said, it makes the letdown even more.
Yeah, and Shasta, who I said was at the bottom of my list when we were kind of talking about these characters way back at the beginning of the book, just with his heroic act here, really jumps up as one of my. Erev is still the best to me, but Shasta really loved seeing this new side of him that comes out here, and then he gets whisked away and he's gone. Right.
I love the change that Shasta's character has gone through in order to get him to this place where this inner trait can be awoken.
Yeah. Well, Phil, we have not done this since like maybe the first or second or third episode, but one of the new segments that we have said we're going to do just occasionally here on the show starting this season is, and we don't have a name for it, so maybe I'll put some cool little music in here, but I do not have an interesting name. But just realizing we're already more than halfway through the Chronicles and wanting to go back and just talk about a couple of things that maybe we glossed over or maybe we missed or maybe we just want to return to. And so today, before we jump into The Horse and His Boy, I would like to go back to both The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and The Silver Chairs, if that's acceptable to you.
Sure.
I have not given you any...
I guess that 2 seasons wasn't enough to cover it. Let's talk about it more.
So I don't think I've ever mentioned this before on the show, and I don't think you know, Phil, but I'm in grad school right now. Is this ringing any bells to you?
That does sound... Oh, that's why we keep having to reschedule stuff.
This is like the third time we've scheduled to record this episode that I have. You were very gracious last time because you're like, can't wait to see you tomorrow. And I was like, you won't, because I did not prepare at all. I did not read the chapter or do anything else. So,
well, I think it is a sign of our lives are getting more and more busy. It's not like we're going to keep increasing forever, but we had a lot of extra time during the initial shutdown and then the kind of period after, and now all the things that were canceled have now been placed in these past 3 or 4 months.
Yeah, we got your 1 year yelling. We got your 1 year wedding celebration coming up soon.
Yeah.
Am I giving a toast at that?
Yes.
Yes, I'm super excited. I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah.
It's going to be a fun time. That's just
You're
like actually like 3.5 weeks away.
Side?
You feeling good about that? This is like your wedding. We didn't do a wedding reception for you last year, so
I've been eagerly looking forward to this for almost a year now.
I'm excited.
Yeah.
Are you and Sarah doing anything? Because you haven't gone on a honeymoon.
We did. We went on a honeymoon. It just wasn't the
That's true.
International.
Well, that's fine. You're right. You did. So are you doing any other thing after this wedding reception, this kind of 1 year after party?
We're having this party, and then we have a little thing for some folks from out of town, and the wedding party the next day.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, your parents invited me to that. I'm hyped.
Yeah,
I'm really looking forward to it.
That's gonna be fun.
So you're going to that? Or no?
I'm gonna stop by
because that's like the thing. Usually at a wedding, it would be a faux pas for you and the bride to show up the morning after.
I don't know. I feel like a lot of people are doing that.
Really?
I don't think we would have done that if we had a traditional.
I mean, I'm okay if you want to do that.
Yeah.
One of my favorite weddings of all time was we've had him on the show before. Trent, my buddy Trent, his wedding. And Trent and his wife Morgan, after the reception, we all went to a barcade till like 3 a.m. and just like got some of the best Moscow mules and just played arcade games. And Trent and Morgan were just hanging out with us the whole time.
Yeah.
And it was incredible. So like I know that sometimes it's like, oh, the bride or groom are supposed to like, okay, they leave after the reception. You don't see them until after the honeymoon or whatever. But also, like you're saying, there's times where I'm like the bride and groom hung out and it was super fun.
Yeah.
So
I feel like so much is leading up to this. Like we have a job change. We have, we just have some big events that have led up to this date. I think that once we get past this, then we can start thinking about, some other stuff. But I think that we've tried to like pick our times for trips. And like we just got back from a trip. We'll probably do something big next year too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know about doing anything. We're running out of PTO right now.
Become a teacher, dude. You get those summers off. It's great.
Yeah.
You work like 60 hours a week.
I saw your wife pass
week,
by at 4 o'clock. I'm like, everyone gets out early too?
All right. What were we talking about before we were talking about weddings? Oh, I was making my silly little joke here about being in grad school. One of the things that I love about paying thousands of dollars to an educational institution is the fact that I get access to a ton of academic journals that I'd have to pay for if I wasn't a student. And I was just about, I don't know, a week ago or so, I was doing research for a paper, and I was like, you know what? What if I just typed in C.S. Lewis's name into our giant, search engine for the library that goes through all the databases that they pay for access to? So I just searched Narnia C.S. Lewis, and I get like 18 pages of peer-reviewed results.
Yes.
And I was like, this is incredible.
That's why we're behind schedule.
And so,
because you're reading all that instead of doing.
So
the
I'm
homework.
like, well, I got quite a bit of time left in the program, but I was like, I need to start downloading all of these for eventually I won't have access to these.
Right.
And I came across two though that I actually wanted to bring up on the show because I'm not going to go through like most of the articles are about. Some are short, like only 5 or 6 pages, but others are usually about 15, 20 pages. I am not going to try to get deep into the academic weeds of what are some really great scholarly journals. I don't know that everyone else would be as interested in that or that I would be able to effectively communicate that. And two, I do kind of want to respect the fact that they're behind paywalls for a reason and they're to support these academics. But two of the articles I came across, I wanted to mention as we think about the way and discuss the way that Lewis is really influenced by the things that he loves himself. We've talked about this a lot on the show before, that one of the things we love so much about C.S. Lewis is that he brings us to the table. He almost like creates this feast of ideas that he loves. And it's like, come join me. Please just join alongside me, right? He's very much not the kind of educator who's like, opening up a child's head and just being like, let me shove knowledge into you. And yet he's also not a constructivist where he's saying like, you construct this knowledge yourself. Everyone's an individual, and so therefore, in this more like postmodern idea, you completely give. You are kind of the arbiter of your own knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he would kind of reject both of those things. So as I was reading through an article called "Always Winter and Never Christmas," it's by a woman named Nancy Lou Patterson. She wrote it for a journal called Myth Lore. And she was focusing actually a lot on the role that time plays in the Chronicles of Narnia, which is super interesting. But I will save a lot of that for another time because some last battle stuff comes into this that I was like, let's wait. But as I was reading her article, I came across a fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen that was published in 1844 called The Snow Queen. Have you ever heard of this fairy tale before?
I have not.
I had not either, and it's one of those that I'm like, how have I not heard of this before? It never came up while we were covering The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but in the story of the Snow Queen, which is about a Snow Queen dressed in white, this Snow Queen wears a fur coat, rides a sleigh, and has a kidnapped boy with her.
Whoa!
In this fairy tale,
Turkish delight, and you'd really have something.
And so she. Mary Lou Patterson was kind of made very direct, like said specifically, this is what Lewis is thinking of when he is writing about the White Witch. Some other scholars, as I kind of did a little bit of other searching, some people are more on the side of, well, he's definitely influenced. There's no way that Lewis wouldn't have known about this fairy tale, and some of that imagery is very evocative of the Snow Queen, but maybe it's not a direct correlation. But it seems like Patterson was like, no, like this is very much Lewis is pulling from a wonderful fairy tale author from the 19th century and saying, like, look at this. I'm bringing some of Hans Christian Andersen into my own story. So I thought that was just cool and wanted to mention that because that never came up when we were talking about the White Witch.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I love how things combine over time in that way. So that was 100 years before? And
1844.
Yeah,
so
roughly,
about 110 years before.
Yeah, I know these were published a little bit after he was writing them, of course. But also the fact, it's fun to imagine, how did he have access to this? I know that's quite a popular author, but just the fact that influence is there, but that he also added so much and changed things to fit his story.
I'm sure that some of his education at those different schools he was at before he went to be with the Great Knock, right, to do his kind of private tutoring. I'm sure that they would have had maybe access to some of these things. You have to assume that Oxford, while he's a student there and then eventually a tutor there, he's got access to a lot of these things. Even though he's obviously focused on medieval and Renaissance literature, I can't imagine that he wouldn't ever, that stuff just wouldn't come into even some of his academic work itself. Yeah. But speaking of some of his academic work, the other article that I found that I wanted to just throw out there too, because again, it points back to Lewis bringing us to this feast of beautiful ideas and saying like, go, here's what I love. I want you to love it too. I found another article called Dante's Divine Comedy and C.S. Lewis's Narnia Chronicles by a woman named Marcia Ann Daigle in a journal called Christianity and Literature. So, Phil, I know that we've talked a little bit about Dante before. Somehow it did not come up at all as we talked about the Silver Chair, and I'm slightly embarrassed that this didn't happen because I am by no means a Dante scholar, but I do go through Inferno with my 6th grade students. We read a great translation by an Italian professor. So I'm familiar enough with it. and I did not make some of the pretty simple connections of just, they're going underground, and they're going, it's cold at some places, like on the ninth circle of hell when you get there in Dante, but there's some much bigger things. I'm like, I totally do not feel embarrassed for not getting these things, but I wanted to mention a couple things to you. Is this acceptable?
Let's hear them.
Is this allowed? I'm just...
Sure.
Okay, I'm just teasing. So have you read any of the Divine Comedy?
I have. We studied it in 9th or 10th
Yeah,
grade.
sure. Okay. Yeah. So I don't know if you remember this character of Beatrice that shows up in the Divine Comedy. She's not really an important character until the final part, which is Paradise.
Okay.
You familiar with this character at all?
I don't recall.
So a little bit of backstory about Beatrice. Beatrice is a fictitious character in the Divine Comedy, but most scholars believe that she was based off of a real woman named Beatrice, who Dante first met when he was like 9 or 10 years old, fell in love with her at first sight, according to him, and then only saw her a couple of other times throughout his life. He was married off because that's what you did back then, is you had arranged marriage, and pretty much throughout most of his life, despite being married to another woman, seems to have this strong love for this woman who he fell in love with when he first saw her when he was a child. And Beatrice comes up in Paradise. So as Dante goes through hell and then into purgatory, Virgil is his guide, right? But then Virgil can't go into Paradise because he's a pagan. And so Beatrice comes down from heaven and then leads Dante through heaven, through Paradise. All right.
Is that when they're on the bus and they're pointing out all the different...
Okay, but this is another thing too. Obviously, Lewis is pulling from a lot of Dante stuff when he's writing the Great Divorce for sure.
Right.
So, some scholars, I wanted to point out this because as I've talked about this with my students, some scholars kind of point to Beatrice almost being this allegory for Christ, although it's already a Christian story, but she's kind of showing some of the Christ-like qualities in the way that she leads Dante through Paradise. But I wanted to read directly from this article, just at these small. This is just a small example that Daigle points out that I just think shows us the just absolute. I mean, we all know it. If anyone's listening to this podcast, they know that Lewis is a genius, but it just continues to surprise me how wise, how intricate these Narnia Chronicles are. It's so much. The more time we spend with them, they are just absolutely not a slapdash of random things. It seems like almost everything he's doing is methodical in many ways, and not just everything has to have meaning behind it. He would not want us to read his books that way, but it's more of the influence that is on him that goes into this. So let me read just what she writes about a connection between Beatrice and Jill Pole. She writes, as Lewis's three travelers are about to descend into the underworld, there is an extremely brief but distinct image of Beatrice. At the castle of Harfang, Jill has been given a change of apparel by the giants, and for a fleeting instant looks like Beatrice as she first appears in the garden. There's a part where she shows up in the garden in Paradise. I won't get into all that right here. Jill, and then she is quoting from the Silver Chair, wore a vivid green robe, and over that a scarlet mantle fringed with white fur. And then this is back to Daigle. Although the colors of Jill's mantle and robe reverse the order of colors in Beatrice's clothing from, and this actually, I said Paradise, I meant from Purgatory. From Purgatory, the combination of a robe and a mantle is the same, and the white, green, and red color scheme is identical. Although unlike Beatrice in most respects, Jill is just about to descend into the kingdom of evil under the earth to rescue a confused and lost soul, and thus, as she is about to begin acting like Beatrice, she is dressed like Beatrice.
Ooh, interesting.
Right?
Yeah. Man, it must be so fun to find this stuff.
I read this, I'm like, oh man, so in many ways, Jill is going to be Prince Rilian's guide out of this place and into the glorious realm of Narnia in the same way that Beatrice leads Dante. And like I said, I said it was Paradise earlier, but that scene is actually from Purgatory. I think it's from the 10th canto that that happens in, and just
Sounds like a Star Wars name. Her name is Tin Canto.
Tin Canto. But it's just, and I don't know if anyone else thinks this stuff is as cool as I do. If not, you could have skipped ahead to like 15 minutes of the episode, and that doesn't hurt my feelings. But I wanted to share this because it just shows us more than just the genius of Lewis, because we know that. But I think especially for me, it resonates deeply for me as an educator, just because it shows that Lewis is someone who loves what he's studying. Right. Education is not simply a profession to him. It's much more than that, in the way that he takes these beautiful things that he loves, whether it be Dante or fairy stories, right? And he incorporates them into these wonderful stories that point back to the ultimate myth, the myth of Christ, right? The true myth. And the more that you read Lewis, the more that it's not the Bible. Don't get me wrong. This is not scripture, but it acts like scripture in a way where, like, every time you come back to it, I feel like this with Narnia, I'm just like, it just feels richer than it ever did before.
Right. And I've found this maybe in the past 10 years. There's so much joy to read an entire story, enjoy it, but then to read about the author and see what things happened in his life that may have influenced this. Because most of the time, probably all the time, they're not just making it up. They're pulling from something that really happened, combining it with something that they really enjoyed, content-wise.
Yeah.
And it's also fun to think, how did they come across this? How did they study this? Because they had limited access. Someone had to tell them about it. And now we currently have basically unlimited access. There's more content being made than we can ever consume.
Sure.
And it's hard to pick stuff out now. But it's also fun to take something that you love, like Chronicles of Narnia, and go back and see, like, what was he reading? And then what were they reading? And follow things all the way back.
There's that great book that just came out about a year or two ago by Holly Ordway about Tolkien's bookshelf, just kind of talking about what Tolkien was reading. And I could easily see where someone could cynically look at that and be like, well, why do we care? Why do we care what was on Tolkien's bookshelf, right? And it's like, actually, it really matters what was on his bookshelf. If we can assume that he was reading, and I do think we can assume that Tolkien was reading the books on his bookshelf. Yes. They were not just there for decorations, but it actually does matter, because these are the things that are formative in him. The things we read, like you said, the stories we engage with, they form us, right? And that's why it is so important that we're engaging and connecting with stories that form something good in us, right? Like we James K. Smith, the Canadian theologian and author, he's got that whole book all about you are what you love, right? It's the things that you love will form you. And so that's why it's so good. And that's why we want to instill these in our children and the people we love, to be like, read good books, read good stories, because it's actually Charlotte Mason calls that twaddle is like the opposite of good stories, just like books that are just not forming you in good ways, or just not forming you at all in positive ways. And so Lewis is just the antithesis of twaddle. Right.
Oh, I'm glad you found this.
Yeah. Thanks for letting me get on my soapbox again and just kind of share some of these really fun things. Yeah. This is not really a soapbox. I'm not arguing anything. I'm just getting excited about things.
Right.
Well, Phil, I've talked a lot, and I think it's time for you to pick us back up in The Horse and His Boy. Let us know what's been going on, and then try to figure out what is happening with this hermit of the Southern March.
I'm glad you said his name, because I had to trim it out to get my word count out.
Oh, good.
Yes.
You call him Herm?
I call him Herm for sure.
Herm.
Hey, Herm. The group journeys north. At first, they see no sign of Tashbaan, but then far in the distance, they spot rising dust, along with flashing helmets and armor. The children mount the horses and race through valleys and over ridges. Just when it seems they cannot go any faster, the roar of a lion kicks everyone into a higher gear. When Bree ignores Shasta's shouts, the boy leaps down to help his friend. In an effort to stop the attack, he yells at the lion and is amazed when it turns and rushes away. A man beckons them inside and begins to treat Erebus's wounds. The man introduces himself and encourages Shasta to continue on his mission to warn Archenland while he takes care of the horses. The next morning, Erebus comforts Bree, who feels he is a coward for running away.
Well done. That was not a lot to fit. That was a lot. Sorry. That was not easy to fit all of that into a chapter summary. You've done a great job.
Thank you. It took a lot of trimming.
Well, what were some things that stood out to you before we get into kind of a more extended, in-depth look at this chapter?
Yeah, just in terms of visual, the very first part where they see this cloud of what they think is smoke, and then they realize that it's people, like a group of people running toward them, and then they see the flashing helmets and armor. What an incredible visual. On top of this somewhat peaceful but hurried thing that's happening where they're trying to make their way through and get there before these soldiers do. But then on the horizon, they see this group coming.
That's good, yeah.
Yeah. How about you? What stood out?
The whole just weirdness of this hermit guy, right? Like that, it really does feel like Tom Bombadil, right? There's this just random guy in the middle of their journey that seems to know everything, and it seems like he's gone at the end of this chapter for the most part. So I could be wrong. Yeah. But it seems like it's over. He's kind of a one and done. I know Tom Bombadil technically shows up after then because he helps Frodo in the Barrow Downs and stuff, but he is like a one and done character. And I am just left with more questions than a chapter in the Chronicles of Narnia usually leaves me with. Who is this hermit? What is this garden? Is this a garden that we've seen before or maybe we'll see later in the Chronicles of Narnia? Yeah, what's that tree in the middle of it? Is this Aslan? If this is Aslan, why did he hurt Aravis? What came over? Okay, this one I can maybe answer itself. Maybe why Shasta did this brave act. I think there has been strong enough character development to kind of lead to this decision in him. All right, so maybe that one's not a question. So how does the hermit even know what they're doing? He's like, oh no, those are just the Clormans over there, and you've got to go see King Loon. Get out of here. Like, how does he know that?
Right.
He shouldn't know that. And then, I know everything happening now, but I don't know if she's going to be dead by the time the sun goes down, but probably not, but I don't know. Right. But I do know everything else that's happening now.
I can't guarantee that anyone will still be dead.
I have so many questions, and I'm making it sound like I'm upset about it, but I'm actually not at all.
Yeah, you have a big grin on your face.
I'm enjoying it, just that there's so many things that are just left unanswered here at the end of a chapter. Lewis doesn't usually write like this as far as kind of mysterious world building. He doesn't keep his world... it's very much like it allows your imagination to fill in the gaps, but not because it's like, oh, I'm going to be mysterious and let you try to guess. That's not really a Lewis type way of writing his fantasy.
Right. Yeah, the timing of this tall person with a beard appearing right after so much intense action with the lion is really interesting.
Do you think that this man is Aslan, is what you're saying?
I don't. Do you?
You can't say it. Well, no, I definitely don't think he's Aslan.
Yeah.
Not at all. I think he's definitely Father Christmas on vacation.
I'm a little conditioned
like to
think he's a star.
What?
Which is kind of close to
he could maybe that's true because you've got both Koryakin and Ramandu, right? That are both kind of similar like this. I was going to do this later, but can I get into my Daniel's Dilemma right now?
Let's do it.
Okay, here is, because we're already here, here is what I'm proposing. All right, so Chapter 10 of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is the chapter where Father Christmas shows up and the snow melts out of Narnia because Aslan has returned. The whole spring is nearer, right, is the big thing that we keep hearing. And then he leaves, okay? Chapter 10 of The Horse and His Boy, which is next chronologically, we get old guy with a white beard, and I think that this is Father Christmas.
Okay.
This is what I'm actually, I'm kind of being facetious, but I also want it to be, how this has come up before on the show, but I don't know when this would have ever come up, but I feel like at least you and I have talked with this before. Like those old like Santa figurines where Santa's wearing a Hawaiian shirt, like with a flamingo and like grilling, and it's like the South Pole or some like joke like that, even though it would still be cold there, but whatever. It's like you should be in Hawaii, but okay. That's this in Narnia. This is Father Christmas on vacation. He's gone down to a warmer place, not too arid. He's out. He's in Arkenland, but still nice and warm place just to relax before he goes delivers gifts again for Christmas. That's my theory. I'm sticking to it. This is Father Christmas. Episode is over.
All right, let's make a note of the time so that we can come back and bring this up at the end of the, end of the series.
I don't really think it's Father Christmas. I just want it to be.
Yeah.
Well, let's actually walk through this chapter together, Phil, and talk about some of the things that we come across here, because there's some really interesting conversations that our characters have, and like you said, there's just wonderful imagery from Lewis as well. So start us off with where do you want to go first?
So they're all journeying together, and they're kind of in between Tashbaan and Arkenland, and it's only once they cross this river that they realize that they're actually there. About halfway through, wouldn't you say?
It seems so, right? It's at this point, it looks as if they've made it across the desert in about 2 days, and that was a lot of traveling over 2 days, but. The city of Tashbaan does not seem to be nearly as far from Arkenland as I would have maybe originally thought. I would have thought it would have taken them a week or so to get there, but they seem to do it in about 48 hours. Now, that's almost, except for that one nap they had by the river in the last chapter, that's almost straight traveling the whole time. But they do go into Arkenland, and there's all this great description of trees. We get like
Well, we get some really incredible descriptions of rivers, which are wide and turbulent, and some low hills and ridge beyond ridge. He describes something called the Northern Mountains themselves. And listen to some of the words: pinnacles clinging to the ledges, pine-clad slopes, frowning cliffs, narrow gorges, blue peaks. I feel like I can picture where he is.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. It's very much very typical of Lewis here to have some great prose as he's describing this. And, as they're going through this, there's a lot of fear because and maybe I'll let you describe it because you seem to really enjoy this. It's what stood out to you. What is this realization like as they realize who's behind them?
Well, the narrator just finishes describing some of what they're seeing, and then they don't see it, and the fact that they don't see anything from Tashbaan, and then suddenly someone goes, "Hello, what's that?" And they think that it's maybe smoke, which might mean fire. Someone says sandstorm, which is a great song. And they're not seeing anything that would indicate people, and then all of a sudden they are. And they're seeing flashes of light, helmets, and armor.
This is like Aragorn looking out at the 10,000 Uruk-hai coming from Isengard, that scene in the Two Towers, right? Just seeing like, guys, we're in trouble, right? Yep. By the way, just as a pause, I think our listeners will enjoy this. When Aragorn eventually gets back to Helm's Deep, not back, he arrives there, and that scene that's not in the book where he falls off the horse, and I don't think that's in the book. I don't remember that being in the book at all. But when he goes and opens the doors and he pushes them up, remember that was like in every trailer for the movie where he pushes them open in slow motion? To this day, if I come across 2 doors that push open like that, I do the Aragorn thing. I even put my head down and I kind of like shake my long, shaggy, wet hair that doesn't exist, but that Aragorn has. We have some leading into the chapel at our school. So whenever I walk in, my kids are behind me like, what are you doing, man? I'm like, that's how Aragorn does in the movie, guys. Sorry.
Well, for years I used to walk through automatic doors, giving a little hand gesture.
Darth Vader, yeah,
like anyone from Star Wars, any Jedi from Star Wars. And finally, someone noticed. They said, "Are you using the Force on the doors?"
Yeah.
Yes.
I used to. The one that I did, which is a little bit different, was. There's a couple of shots, I think they're in Jedi, where Darth Vader comes out of an elevator. And so whenever I'd be in an elevator that opened up 2 doors in the middle, I would stand right up to it. Yeah. And so it would open up and then I would walk out.
Did you put your hand on your belt?
Very menacingly, like I'm walking out of these doors. That's how Vader talks in my head, I think. That sounds like James Earl Jones, right?
Right.
I'm walking out of these doors. He's British. I sound like David Prowse, which is the problem. They didn't let him do it. If anyone doesn't know, David Prowse was the actor who was inside of Darth Vader and
operating him with little controls.
No. He was the man he's
the bodybuilder.
He was not told until post-production that, hey, we're actually not going to use your voice, and we're not really going to credit you all that much as the main villain of this movie. And that happened all the way through Return of the Jedi, and he still really didn't get a lot. Like he could be like conventions and stuff, but he didn't really get. He had a big falling out with a lot of the cast and stuff. There was just a documentary. He passed away just about 2 years ago. It was a big documentary that came out on him about 5 or 6 years ago. Just talking about kind of what that was like. That he was like did not know that he was going to get, dubbed over by James Earl Jones. By the way, speaking of, this has nothing to do with Narnia, but I need to tell you a story I just heard. Speaking of dubbing, so
before
you're familiar with
this, I just want you to know that when we review these episodes before they're released, sometimes SJ listens to them, and she says, "Is this really what it's like?" I'm like, "Yep." Just 3 or 4 different tangents.
This is a good story, I promise. Okay, and then we'll get back to Narnia. I think you'll want to hear the story. So, you've heard of the character James Bond. Does this sound familiar to you?
Yes.
Okay, so he has a little-known movie, the 3rd movie in the series called Goldfinger. Heard of that one, right? Okay, so Ulrich, isn't his name like Ulrich Goldfinger, I think is his name in the movie. He was played by a German actor. He was hired by Cubby Broccoli, who was the producers, or he was the producer like most of the Bond movies in the first couple decades. And MGM, the movie studio, they saw him in a German movie in German and were like, that's our guy. We want him to play Goldfinger. I don't remember the actor's name. The actor's agent was like, they were like, hey, he just to check, he speaks English, right? And the agent was like, oh yeah, totally speaks English. Like, it's not a problem. Like, he acts in this German movie and he speaks German, but yeah, totally speaks English, fine. So they hire him for the movie, shows up first day on set, has a very, very thick German accent. Yeah. And they're like, we can't do this. And for some reason, I don't know why they couldn't just get a new actor, but they were like, we're just going to dub you the entire movie. So like that actor he's dubbed by a completely different person.
Huh. Do you think you'll ever do that to this show? Replace me with somebody?
Yeah, you want me to?
Yeah.
Well, we talk about the time where I made you laugh at one of my jokes once. I put your little that was like the first episode.
Well, no, you had me agree to something.
Oh, that's right.
And I think we're going to do this. And I go, yep. And I listened to it. I thought, this is dangerous.
This is scary.
I've handed over so many clips of my voice.
All right, was that too long of a tangent for you?
No.
Okay, good. So let's go back to Narnia now. And this Calorman army led by Rabadash here is zigzagging. They're making their way. They're trying to find a place where they can ford this river. And as bad as this is, it's at that exact moment when there's another sound being heard. I know you've already read this, Phil, but when you were reading this for the first time, did you think, oh, we got another lion on our hands?
It just became, you're reading at such a fast pace, it all kind of becomes clear at the same time. You're just alerted by a sound, and then you start to realize what it is. And as soon as you realize, then it's confirmed.
See, I agree. I kind of was like, oh, okay, cool. Aslan's here. And then I was like, oh, he's going to come up and tell them like a better way to go. Like I had decided at this point in the chapter that the Hermit was maybe a bad guy, and he was going to be like tempting them or luring them into this garden. And Aslan's like, don't go in there, guys. I guess Aslan sounds like Darth Vader too in my head. Don't go in there. Come with me, and I'll get you away from this. And then the lion tries to eat them. Like, who is this guy?
Yeah.
Right. So
but
walk us
motivating.
Through this. What?
It's motivating.
Yeah. Walk us through this story here, this part of the text.
Well, the thing that stands out to me is that Shasta, for the first time, seems to want to go and help. Maybe he's always wanted to help, but he's no longer thinking about himself. He just knows that he's on track to get away, but he needs to go help Erebus and Hwin.
Yeah, Bree is faster than Hwin is. So Hwin and Erebus are falling behind. Shasta says, stop, must go back, must help. And Bree, I'll read these 2 paragraphs real quick. Lewis writes, Bree always said afterwards that he never heard or never understood this. And as he was in general a very truthful horse, we must accept his word. Shasta slipped his feet out of the stirrups, slid both his legs over on the left side, hesitated for one hideous hundredth of a second, and jumped. It hurt horribly and nearly winded him, but before he knew how it hurt him, he was staggering back to help Aravis. He had never done anything like this in his life before and hardly knew why he was doing it now.
Then we hear Wynn's scream, and a bunch of stuff happens. The lion actually attacks Aravis. She gets hit. It has a wide open, raging mouth. But when Shasta says, go home, the lion seems to stop.
Right?
Immediately. And in that same instant, leave. It comes to a very abrupt end.
This is so odd. I kind of don't want to talk about it because I feel like whatever I say, I'm going to be wrong about what's happening here. But I know this is what people want to hear. So they didn't want to hear about Goldfinger or you and I on elevators. They do want to hear this. So I'll give the people what they want. And I just don't know if this is Aslan or not. And let me kind of walk you through my two lines of thinking here. The first one is I could see an instance where this is Aslan, and the thought process behind this is there's that one line that Lewis writes where it says, the poor chaps are doing all they can, speaking to the horse. Like Shasta's thinking that about the horses. And then Lewis, as the narrator writes, and certainly both horses were doing, if not all they could, all they thought they could, which is not quite the same thing. So, okay, I could see an instance where this is Aslan spurring them on, chasing them in, just like he did back in chapter 2, like away from danger or towards their next companions, right? I could see that, where he's like, I'm going to kind of speed you up more than you ever thought you could go, right? And use that as like kind of this motivation to actually, it might not be what you want right now, but it is what you need. But then what throws me off that is then he actually physically hurts Aravis, which seems odd for Aslan to do. And then on top of that, Shasta just says, go home, and the lion listens. When we know for a fact that Aslan does not serve the Narnians, or the people, that they listen to him. It's not the other way around, right? So that's one line of thinking. The other line of thinking is this isn't Aslan, it's just a wild lion that is chasing them, that almost kills Aravis, but through Shasta's bravery, which maybe later Aslan or say, thank you for that. This was a great thing that you have done. That through Shasta's bravery, the lion is somehow scared off by Shasta. But what doesn't make sense about that is then at the same time, why would it just be scared away by Shasta? Like again, right. I'm not convinced either way. I legitimately do not know what's happening here. So tell us what is happening. Go ahead, just tell me. No. I won't tell anyone. I'll edit it out. Please.
There are a couple things to think through. One is, why do you think Aslan wouldn't hurt Aravis, like physically cut through?
But if this is a proposal, right, I could see an instance where we know that Aslan can cause pain. One of the best stories in all the Chronicles of Narnia is literally Aslan putting Eustace through a tremendous amount of pain.
That's the first thing that comes to mind, is the fact that he tore through Eustace and took off the dragon part of him in a way that only he could. Well, another thing that comes to mind is, do you remember when Jill encounters Aslan for the first time and what he tells her when she asked?
Yeah, I've swallowed whole children alive.
So that makes me think that this isn't too far from something that Aslan would do.
Yeah.
And I'm doing my best right now to speak in ways if I don't recall what I've read afterwards.
Sure.
Which it helps recording late at night because I actually don't remember everything that happens after this.
If I had to choose a side, I do think this is Aslan. I do think that that line that might appear like a throwaway line at first of like they didn't know that they could go harder than this. I think that is directly correlated to what Aslan is doing here, what this line is doing here, which is that pushing them on to something greater. And that does sometimes mean pain, right? That does sometimes mean difficulty, right? And it does sometimes even look like failure, because out of all of this, Hwyn is the only one that kind of comes out of this completely fine, right? Aravis is physically hurt. Bree is mentally just kind of defeated. And then Shasta's now alone, right? And I think there's an interesting, if this is Aslan, there's an interesting conversation to be had about what Aslan's role in these negative outcomes for 3 out of the 4 characters means for his sovereignty and his overall goodness, right? We have been told since the very second or third chapter we ever heard Aslan's name that he is not safe.
But he's good.
But he's good. And so I do think that if you now, I kind of just like playing both ways, but the more I've thought about it, I really do lean into this being Aslan, although I'm still really confused about the just getting thrown away, running away from Shasta. Maybe I'm reading too much. Maybe in my head I'm imagining that being more of like I'm scared running away instead of I'll just kind of stop running at you and I'll just kind of just slowly walk away.
I feel like Aslan, if this is Aslan, he may be doing what he's doing up until a point until Shasta reaches what he needs to reach, which is the ability to get over himself and then go try to defend his friend.
Yeah.
And as soon as that happens, the lion's job is done for that time, and he turns away.
These are good points. This is fun to really hear you. I kind of share these things.
Yeah.
Let's keep moving though into this little garden with the beautiful tree and with the hermit, and talk about what potentially might be happening here. I want to hear from you. What is this space like for us as readers?
This feels like a checkpoint where we just accomplished something incredibly difficult. He jumped between a lion and someone about to be eaten, and Shasta succeeded, and there's this brief moment of peace until the Hermit of the Southern March says what his name is and that you need to keep going. You need to continue to go and warn everyone what's about to happen.
Again, how does the hermit know that he's supposed to go warn people? I have no idea, but he does, and he says just like, go out this door, you'll get straight to King Lune. I bet
they had a guy on the inside.
What?
That's right, Hercules Mulligan.
That's good. I also do love that Shasta's like, hey, are you the king? Like, this makes sense because Shasta doesn't know what a king looks like.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And the only prince he's ever met looked just like him.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Because I'm pretty sure it's his brother. But he has, he just sees this, one random guy in the garden, like, hey, you're the king, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what kings look like.
Yep.
Yeah. And then Shasta, like you said, is sent off. Lewis has an interesting line where he says that he had not yet learned that if you do one good deed, your reward usually is to be set to do another and harder and better one.
I too have that highlighted.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Why?
That ain't it just the way it goes? you do something and then you got to do the next thing. Graduate high school, now you got to go to college.
I don't know if that's what he's referring to, but okay.
It just seems like in general a truth. Like it's hard to do a good thing. It's hard to do the right thing sometimes, and then your reward is to face an even more difficult situation and have to do it again.
Yeah, I wonder too if any of our Catholic and Orthodox listeners would kind of liken some of this to theosis, in kind of this idea that we're not simply striving for just do this good deed and pat yourself on the back, but it is a continual journey of progressing to try and be more and more Christ-like in your life, and not ever going, okay, I finally made it, now I'm done. That's not that isn't a thing. That doesn't happen here. You don't go like,
it doesn't happen in this life.
Yeah, exactly. I've finally become good enough. I'm done. And so I wonder if that's what Lewis is reminding us here, that like, hey, Shasta did something incredibly brave, but that's not all his character. It's not like he's done developing as a character. He needs to continue to grow. He needs to continue to do more brave things, to continue to, even if it's not something that's more brave than, risking your life to save someone in need, but then just continually doing brave things just as often, to always be caring for others and stuff. So I wonder if that's kind of what
the ABCs.
Yeah.
Always be caring.
Isn't that an Office thing?
That's it's Alec Baldwin and Glenn Ross or something.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's keep moving on and talk about this dynamic between the two cousins, which is what the Hermit calls the horses, and Aravis, who is recovering here, and then the goats as well, too. We get some goat milk here as well. Do you think that the Hermit is an actual animal, and that's why he's calling them cousins?
I'm afraid so.
You think so?
Yeah. What's that called? When you can turn into an animal?
Like a shapeshifter?
Yeah, but
like animorphs. I think it's called animorphs.
Animorphs.
Yeah.
No, and what do they call it in Harry Potter?
I don't know. They're called shapeshifters in Tolkien's. This is an interesting dynamic between these three characters as Aravis is resting, because the Hermit, and maybe I'm just picking up on this, but the Hermit seems to be the first non-Calorman to also treat the horses, while still treating them as equals, very clearly gives them orders of what to do. And I wonder if this is telling us something about his role in this world, or if this is just the first non-child we've seen around these horses. And so it just feels like it's almost bossy, because we usually just see Aravis and Shasta, who are like 10-year-old kids.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I also feel like maybe it's because they take such good care of them, and the children are not at that level yet.
Yeah, and they are taken really good care of. They all get to sleep on the heather. They're resting there. Aravis even wakes up in the morning and feels ready to go.
She does. And the Hermit tells her that her wounds are washed and dressed, but he also informs her that, instead of eating or sinking his teeth into you, the lion only drew his claws across her back. But not in a deep or dangerous way.
Yeah, and I think that is a really interesting comment, because he makes it clear that like the lion could have really eaten you, and for some reason it didn't, right?
Yeah. And then the guy reveals that he's 109 years old.
109 winters. I think, look, he uses the word winters here. Who else counts years based off of winters?
The White Witch.
Santa Claus. Oh, yeah, that too.
Maybe it was one really long winter.
Oh, you think?
Recently, so he could be even older.
Wait, okay, this is important, because wait, how does time work here? Because in recent memory, at this time in Narnia, the White Witch is just recent history, right? Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy are in their 20s, and they came here just about 10, 15 years ago. Does he count that one winter as one of the 109? Or is he like, let's say it did last exactly 100 years. Was it, is it, he's counting all of those years as 100, and it's been 9 years since that happened?
I think that he counts every winter in another place, because he wasn't actually in Narnia.
Oh.
So he's in Arkenland. I'm going to say it right every single time.
Sure.
He's been in Arkenland this whole time, so maybe he wasn't affected by
the
eternal winter.
You're totally right. It was just in Narnia that was always winter and never Christmas, so it wouldn't apply to him. Yep. So we can just pretend that we'll just take it that he's 109 years old.
Crisis averted.
That was this. This was a huge problem. We were not going to be able to end the episode without figuring this out.
Glad we figured it out.
So he reveals, I'm 109 years old.
Is he Dutch?
What?
Yeah, I'm 109 years old. By the way, thanks for letting me watch Far From Home. absolutely still my favorite part. And I forgot about it, and it surprised me.
What are you talking
when
about?
he's in prison.
I don't remember. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't even know what movie or show or anything.
Spider-Man Far From Home.
Oh, Spider-Man Far From Home. Okay.
And he's wearing the jersey, and he's like, everyone here is so nice. And then he like breaks out of jail, and they like go over to the door, and they pull it closed because they want to stay in jail because that's the right thing to do.
No, I don't remember this at all.
Oh man, it's so good. Well,
Did you like rewatch it or something recently?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
On my account.
I like watching Spider-Man 2 in different versions.
Okay,
that's so like the Tobey Maguire one, and then I did the Tom Holland one. I really don't want to do the Andrew Garfield one.
The other one, yeah.
I'm gonna just watch the first one from that one.
Yeah. You know, one thing I want to mention in that exchange is that Hermit, when he's saying to Aravis, "Hey, I'm 109 years old," he's actually responding to her saying, "I have had luck," talking about how her scratches are really not very deep or dangerous. And the Hermit's saying, "Hey, I'm 109 years old," and then he goes on to say this. That he's never yet met any such thing as luck. There is something about all this that I do not understand, but if ever we need to know it, you may be sure that we shall. So this is the equivalent of Han Solo saying, in my experience, Obi-Wan Kenobi is saying, in my experience, there's no such thing as luck. Any thoughts about what he's saying here?
It's an interesting perspective, just saying that, we'll find out if we need to, which is interesting, but it's not super helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is encouraging to be like, yeah, this doesn't make sense. I don't think this is luck. I think this is something providential is happening here with this encounter with the lion. And, I don't know what it is, but if it's important for us to know it, we eventually will know it. And that shows a lot of confidence, and it shows us that the Hermit knows a lot more than he's telling us, right?
Yeah.
I believe him that he really doesn't know why it happened, but I think he has to be like, look, I know about a pretty powerful lion that comes around here sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Well, we just have about a page or so left of the chapter, but we get this really sad but hopeful exchange between Bree and Aravis and Hwyn and the Hermit. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Bree does not feel great about what happened, and it seems like he's beating himself up about it to the point where he wants to go back to Calormen
to be a slave.
Yeah, back to slavery. And Hwyn tries to reassure him that they all ran as hard as they could, but Bree just brings up the fact that Shasta went back, and this is such an interesting flip of the dynamic between Bree and Shasta, where Bree has always been telling him what to do because
I'm a war horse, right?
Bree knows better. I'm super brave. I've done all this stuff, but then this kid does something more brave than he does, and I think it shatters his self-view initially, but then also just really makes him feel down about himself.
Yeah, I mean, it undermines his entire identity, right? Everything he's thought about himself turns out to really not be what he thought it was.
Yeah.
And that stresses him out, that worries him, and that calls into question his entire identity. And to be fair, I think Bree should be upset with himself. Like, he did something cowardly. He is the adult of him, and Hwyn are the adults of this group, and he has bragged about being this war horse. He's fought in all these battles, and when they finally have danger right behind him, he leaves the three of them behind. And so, like, this is a failure of his. I don't think this is I think it's nice that Hwyn and Aravis are nice to him, but, like, as readers, we can look at it and be like, no, yeah, like he made a mistake. He definitely did. But it's not just as simple as saying, oh, this character made a mistake. Lewis goes to a more nuanced approach, because then the Hermit comes in, and I'm going to go ahead and just read exactly what the Hermit says to Bree. My good horse, you've lost nothing but your self-conceit. No, cousin. Don't put back your ears and shake your mane at me. If you are really so humbled as you sounded a minute ago, you must learn to listen to sense. You're not quite the great horse you would come to think from living among poor dumb horses. Of course, you were braver and cleverer than them. You can hardly help being that. It doesn't follow that you'll be anyone very special in Narnia. But as long as you know you're nobody very special, you'll be a very decent sort of horse, on the whole, and taking one thing with another. And that's where the chapter ends.
It does. It's an interesting place to stop, where he is encouraging this horse, and then he's done. And you left off an extra.
Yeah, I left out one sentence about them going to eat some mash.
But the fact that it just ends there, we don't know what happened to Shasta.
Mm-hmm.
We don't really know how Bree responds to that. We don't even know what Hwyn and Erebus are thinking here. But man, it sure makes me want to turn the page.
Yeah, and it's a really important lesson to remind Bree, but to remind us as readers too, that Bree is focused so much on greatness that he's really lost sight of what his identity is, right? And being a Narnian horse. And in Calormen, with these other horses that were dumpies, that didn't talk, right? He has kind of just been like, yeah, I'm doing better than them, but the bar's so low. He's like the college freshman who, did decently well in high school and then gets to college and is like,
finds
oh my gosh,
everyone else also did decently.
Everyone else did well too, right? And I'm not really as special as I thought I was. And that's actually a really good thing to happen. It's a really humbling thing. I think we all go through that at some point in our lives where we think we're top dog about something, and then we are put into a situation where that's put in perspective, and we're like, "Oh, I'm not."
Right.
Yeah.
I thought I was really into Star Wars until I started chatting with you.
I remember being a sixth grader. I had played drums at that point for 5 or 6 years already because I started pretty young. And I was usually the best at my school, and I went to like all county band. We had like a little band competition thing for maybe this might have been sixth grade, maybe this was ninth grade. I can't remember. But it was my first year of either middle or high school. Been playing drums for a while. Was feeling really confident in my ability. I'm like, I'm the best in the school. Blah blah blah. And then I get to all county, where it has all the people chosen by band directors from every school, and I'm like, oh my gosh, all these people are just as good, and oh no, they're better than me. Actually, they're all better than me. And it was, I remember just that being one of the worst days of my life at the time, because it was like I had built this identity of I'm Daniel and I'm a drummer. That is what I do. I'm the best and no one's better than me. And then I went to this thing and I'm like, oh, like a lot of people are. And it wasn't just the pain of I'm not the best. It's like, well, if I'm not the best, then who am I? Because that's my identity as being the best. And that's what Bree is struggling with. Like, he should still continue to be corrected on the fact that, yeah, what you did was cowardly. But what's more important is, like, you had your identity wrapped up in being this incredible war horse, and you're just a horse. Like, you're not very special, and that's fine. It reminds me of that Fleet Foxes song that's very much, I'm thinking about the Helplessness Blues, talking about like I'd much rather be I'm not going to go into this because I can't remember it. So,
I'd rather be this than this.
Yeah, I was raised up believing I was somehow unique, a snowflake, unique in each way you could speak. But what did he say? Like, after I've done some thinking, I'd rather be a functioning cog in some great machine serving something beyond me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huh. I was thinking of a different song.
Yeah. I mean, they have a lot of great songs.
Right.
But the whole idea of like, and that's a very anti-Western and anti-postmodern idea, to be not an individual and to be not special, right? To be part of something much bigger than yourself, serving something that's beyond you. That is kind of flies in the face with what a lot of us as Western readers in the 21st century are often going to feel, and I think it's great that Lewis is pointing us back to some really important truth that is often lost in our own lives today. Was that a great place for us to end? You think it's a
It
good
really
place
is.
to stop?
I was just thinking that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Phil, we have. I think we just have time. We've gone on a little bit long. I think we have time for just one listener feedback today. I've got a voicemail for us.
Excellent.
All right.
Let's hear it.
Hey, Daniel, Phil. I was just listening to y'all's section on when Erebus goes to, or is in, Calorman. I'm forgetting the name of the city, and I just looked at it. Anyway. And I thought when y'all were talking about the organized religion of the Calorman people and how there's not an organized church or any organized religion in Narnia, I found that really interesting, and I was wondering, or my first thought was sort of what was Lewis's theology on vocation, and does that maybe somehow relate to maybe being a good Narnian and appropriately recalling Aslan's role in saving the Narnian people in sort of this really the origination and creation of both the world and their kingdom, if that has anything to do with maybe Lewis's theology of vocation, with his sort of understanding of like, hey, be a good member of society that appropriately places God or Aslan at the center, and then like that is pure religion, right? That's sort of how James talks about your true religion is loving the widow and the oppressed. And so I kind of wonder, I was just thinking, I wanted to hear y'all's thoughts on that, see if you had any, talk more about what you think that might have come from. Because it is interesting, you know, he obviously wasn't opposed to organized religion, but there's definitely a varying sort of expression there. Anyway, I love the show. I appreciate what y'all guys do, and looking forward to every other Wednesday. Thanks, guys.
Well, that's a really interesting question.
Yeah,
and
it
I think
really
that
was.
I think that you're gonna have more thoughts on the vocation part, seeing as you've read 18 pages of search results.
No.
C.S.
I think we both can talk about this. I think just because you might not have done any research doesn't mean that you can't have something to say. You have a job, right? And
I
you
do
love
have a job.
Lewis. I think you still can absolutely speak to this. But I think a person better to speak to all of this would be C.S. Lewis himself. And if anyone has not picked up a copy of The Weight of Glory, which is a collection of sermons that Lewis gave over his lifetime, collected by the late Walter Hooper, highly recommend picking that up. The second sermon that is in that is from 1939. It's called Learning in Wartime. Obviously, you can look at the year there, 1939, can think about what is happening in Europe at the time. And Lewis in that is giving this sermon on what learning looks like, and he speaks a lot, not just to education, but to vocation in that sermon. And I want to read some of that, but as I was, and I'm going to in just a minute, but as I was also just reading more about that sermon itself, I came across a really great article just from last year by Jason Stevens, who is an associate professor of English at Cornerstone University. He wrote an article just about a month after the pandemic hit us here in the United States, and kind of looking at vocation in the time of COVID, right? And a lot of people might have seen this. I remember seeing it go around a lot of different places. I think someone even emailed, one of our listeners even emailed it to us. I know it came up with my coworkers as well too. I mean, obviously at a classical school, there's a lot of love for Lewis and this whole learning in wartime coming up as what does it look like during COVID time. But I'll put a link to Dr. Stevens' article, but I want to go ahead and also just read directly from what Lewis says, because I think that some of the questions that were just brought up will be answered in Lewis's own words about what are his thoughts about vocation. So here's what Lewis says, and it is a long. Or do you want to read, Phil? Do you want to read it? Do you want me to read it?
Sure.
All right.
Let us clear it from our minds. The work of a Beethoven and the work of a charwoman become spiritual on precisely the same condition, that of being offered to God, of being done humbly as to the Lord. This does not, of course, mean that it is for anyone a mere toss-up, whether he should sweep rooms or compose symphonies. A mole must dig to the glory of God, and a cock must crow. We are members of one body, but differentiated members, each with his own vocation. A man's upbringing, his talents, his circumstances, are usually a tolerable index of his vocation. If our parents have sent us to Oxford, if our country allows us to remain there, this is prima facie evidence that the life which we, at any rate, can best lead to the glory of God at present is a learned life. By leading that life to the glory of God, I do not, of course, mean any attempt to make our intellectual inquiries work out to edifying conclusions. That would be, as Bacon says, to offer to the author of truth the unclean sacrifice of a lie. I mean the pursuit of knowledge and beauty, in a sense, for their own sake, but in a sense which does not exclude their being for God's sake. An appetite for these things exists in the human mind, and God makes no appetite in vain. We can therefore pursue knowledge as such, and beauty as such, in the sure confidence that by doing so, we are either advancing to the vision of God ourselves, or indirectly helping others to do so. Humility, no less than the appetite, encourages us to concentrate simply on the knowledge or the beauty, not too much concerning ourselves with their ultimate relevance to the vision of God.
Some great words from Clive Staples over there.
Yes.
Yeah, Jack's words here really are wonderful, and I think they give us a good vision of what this might look like in Kulorman culture, right? I mean, maybe not, because obviously that's fantasy, and this is actually Lewis speaking, from himself, right, in the sermon. He's very clear that, God has given each of us different gifts, he talks about upbringing, talents, circumstances, right? That we absolutely should value the work of a Beethoven and the work of someone who is, I can't remember one of the other examples, sweeping rooms, I think he says, is the other things. Like, we should absolutely value that, but that doesn't mean that they're exactly the same, right? And I love how he says it's not a mere toss-up whether you should sweep rooms or compose symphonies, right? But absolutely what we're doing is to the glory of God, right? And I think very much in his vocational theology, Lewis is telling us that everything we do is for the glory of God. We're all members of one body, but there is differentiation in our roles, right? That's not Lewis advocating for a hierarchy or this kind of extremely strict class system or anything like that, but it is acknowledging that there are different gifts that each of us have, right? And that's a very biblical, very New Testament, right, that comes up multiple times. I mean, he's quoting almost directly from the New Testament. He's talking about each members of one body. So to go back to the voicemail, I think that looking at Lewis's theology of vocation, or at least what we see here in learning in wartime, I think it would be correct to say that maybe some of the understanding here is that being a good member of Narnia, or a society, right, that places God or Aslan at the center, is this kind of pure religion that James is talking about. I will say that I do wonder how much Lewis is focused on religion in a supposal. I wonder if this isn't like, here's what I don't think he's doing. I don't think he's like, I'm not going to include religion so people, so that this supposal means this kind of thing.
Right. I think it's more likely that he's just not bringing it in because it's not something he's thinking about.
It's not something he's thinking about, and it doesn't historically fit. Just to kind of like bookend this episode, right? We started talking about how Lewis does bring in the things he loves. We're talking Anderson, Dante, right? And if you think about it, there are not many fairy stories that are focused around or even incorporate organized religion into them. They're much more focused on the naturalistic world and less focused on structures. And so I do think that Lewis just like is trying to write in this tradition of fairy stories for children. He's not going to pull from things that are completely, not really part of that language,
Right.
But I do think that this is still a good conversation to have, which is why we chose this voicemail, because it does kind of have us think about, why isn't Lewis including that? Because it's a, when you really think about it, it does somewhat maybe hurt the idea of the proposal that religion really isn't included at all. The church isn't included at all. And so it makes us ask that. And then again, it got to let us read a little bit from Lewis in Learning in Wartime, which is just such a great sermon.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that voicemail.
Yeah, we
What a
really
great
appreciate
prompt.
that. That's great. All right, Phil. Well, I think we've got to go.
This is a good place to end.
It is a good place to end. It's hard to believe that we are kind of at we're getting close to the finish line here.
That's right.
With The Horse and His Boy. So, I've done a lot of talking and reading. Do you want to read this, or you just read the email?
I just read the whole thing.
Yeah, that's fair.
You do that.
Or not the email, but you read the quote from Lewis. So I will go ahead and wrap up the show. Well, listeners, this episode, as always, is made possible by our patrons over there at patreon.com. If you'd like to support the show, you can listen to a bonus episode each month, along with other rewards. Special thanks, as always, goes out to Aaliyah Steen, Hannah Anderson, John Marr, Emily Wakefield, and Ryan Smith, who will support us at our top tiers. As always, we would love listener feedback. You can leave us a voicemail at 406-646-6733 or leave us an email at thenarniapodcast@gmail.com. We appreciate a review wherever you find your podcast because that helps other listeners find the show and then join together in our read-through. Thank you again for coming on this journey, and we will be back next time with Chapter 11.